let me introduce Kellyanne to you. So Kellyanne is a senior teaching fellow at the University of Strathclyde. She joined the university in 2003. Her research is primarily pedagogical in nature, and I've listed on there some of her current research interests, including sort of best practice in online teaching and assessment, which I'm hoping Kellyanne will share with us, was particularly at the forefront over the last couple of years. So Kellyanne's going to be talking majority of this session, so I'm going to hand you over to her now. So Kellyanne, I'm just going to make you a presenter.
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. So as you said, I am going to talk a bit about my experience of a pilot study that I completed during the previous academic year, 21-22, on embedding Vevox within a Microsoft Teams class. So I should caveat this by saying that I am by no means an expert on Microsoft Teams. I am very much more of a novice with Microsoft Teams. But the structure of the talk today will be a very brief overview of the institutional context. I'll talk about my use of Vevox. Then I'll talk about the pilot study, the results of it, and the lessons learned. So I'm from the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow in Scotland. It's branded as the place of useful learning, and there are 4 faculties at Strathclyde: humanities and social sciences, which my school sits in, engineering science, and business. As an institution, there is no universal adoption of apps used in teaching. So the university wouldn't advise the use of one particular polling app, for example. So Vevox is just one of many polling apps that's used across the university. Why I personally use Vevox and why I advocate for others in the school and the university to use Vevox is that for live lectures, whether they're on campus or online, it gives natural pauses, so it helps to break up the lecture. It can be used as a flipped lecture task. This is something that I have done pre-pandemic. So when I talk about flipped learning, what I mean by that is that my lectures are online, so there are short videos and activities online which make up the lecture content. And then when I see students face to face, I do consolidation activities such as a Vevox quiz. That in turn can be then used to assess students' understanding of the material that's being taught. Because if you can see that quite a few students are answering the questions wrong, then there's obviously a gap in the knowledge there or the understanding. So it provides an opportunity for clarification, and also provides an opportunity for students who may not feel comfortable speaking out in the larger group to ask questions anonymously using the Q&A. So the pilot study that I conducted, it was conducted last year. It was in the context of me having a sense that there's been more of an institutional shift towards Microsoft products at Strathclyde, more use of Teams and forms, etc. So I was really interested to test how Vevox worked when it was embedded in Microsoft Teams, because I was aware that this was a possibility that I hadn't tried before. So I piloted it with a large online class that I happened to be class leader of. So there were around about 150 students in the class. It's a biological psychology class, and they were year 3 of a 4-year psychology degree. And the Vevox questions that were used within the sessions were a mixture of different question types: multiple choice, pin-on, image, etc. So it was a flipped learning experience. Students were still studying remotely at that point because of lockdown. So I would see students live in Microsoft Teams, and there would be a live quiz based on the lecture content for that week. Vevox provides much better functionality than Microsoft Forms. So the default for polling in Teams are the Microsoft Forms questions. And in terms of what I needed the questions for, Microsoft Forms didn't cut it. Initially, the plan was that some sessions would be run using Vevox and some using Forms, and that would offer a comparison. But really, Forms didn't offer the functionality that we needed to be able to run these live quizzes. So they can't be controlled by the staff member, which means students could skip ahead through questions in Microsoft Forums during the live session. And ideally, what I want is a situation where I can ask a question of the whole group, they answer together, and then I can see the collated responses and address any misunderstandings. So another issue with using forums is that students' progress through the Teams questions isn't shown to the staff member. Collated results from the responses to the forums questions are not displayed either to the staff member leading the session. And the question types themselves within Microsoft Forms I felt to be quite limited and not as interactive or visually engaging as the Vevox questions. So the Microsoft Form question types that are available are multiple choice, text entry, rating. So there might be a statement and you would ask students to rate it between 1 and 5 stars, for example. Ranking or ordering, where there are a number of different options and they're rank ordered. Date entry, I can't think of a circumstance where I would want to use this kind of question, but there would be a question and then the respondents are able to use a date as the answer. Likert questions, so there would be a statement and then there would be something like strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, etc. There's a question that permits a file upload and there's a promoter score, so something along the lines of how likely are you to recommend us type of thing. Compared to Vevox, Vevox, I believe, can replicate any of these different kinds of questions and has additional question types on top of that. So they have the standard multiple choice, text entry, rating, ranking, numeric entry, which could also be used for a date entry question if that's what you wanted. In addition, there are word clouds, which are very visually engaging for students. Pin on image, which is fantastic for the kinds of material that I teach, which is biological. XY plot or scatter plot, and latex for technical scientific notation. And I've just noticed that that's not written properly, so apologies for any latex users. So prior to the pilot, when I was using Vevox for online teaching, which like many I have been for the past couple of years, I would use a separate screen share. So students would have to have one window where they could see me as the presenter and see other students in the session, and then would log in separately to Vevox. So would also have a Vevox window, whether that's on the same computer or whether it's on a different device. So the one screen for the meeting, another screen for the Vevox. Students would also have to log in separately, so they would have to have a QR code or a meeting ID in order to access the Vevox session. So what I was really interested in was the staff experience of using Vevox embedded within Teams, but also the student experience. So I piloted embedding it within Teams during that academic year. I used a flipped classroom approach, so there were asynchronous online lectures and then the live sessions where I would present the Vevox quiz sessions. So within Microsoft Teams, I set up a class team, which gave access to all the students in that particular class. And the idea was that students would then be able to engage directly with Vevox within that Microsoft Teams environment. So they wouldn't have a need for a separate sign-in, they wouldn't have a need for juggling separate windows or separate devices. So it should have looked something like that to the students, and the questions would come up. So you can see there's a Vevox tab there on the top. If they went to the Vevox tab, it should automatically take them to the relevant quiz for that day. At the end of each live session, students were given a link to a short survey that they were invited to complete. And there were 10 questions with some additional questions if they responded in a certain way. So what I have done is I've collated the results from each of these questions, and I'll go through each one of them in turn. I should say that there was a very low response rate. So of a class of around about 150, only between 20 and 30 were responding to these surveys and completing the surveys. So I am aware that the types of students who opt to complete the surveys are also the kind of students who do engage with this kind of activity. So I am probably missing a certain cohort of students that don't engage, but I suppose that's the way of these surveys. So first of all, students were asked what device they used to access the live session. And the reason we wanted to know this was just in case there were technical issues that were isolated to a particular type of device, whether it was Windows, Android, etc. So you can see there that almost half of the students used an Apple laptop, around about a quarter used a Windows laptop, and then the others used desktop or tablet. So the first question was, the second question was to ask students whether they attempted the in-session questions or not during the live session. The vast majority of students who responded did access did attempt the in-session questions, with only 6.5% declining to answer the questions. So of that 6.5% who said they didn't attempt the live questions, they were asked what the reasons for not attempting the in-session questions were. And it tends, so these are the kinds of responses that were received. It didn't seem like it was anything specific to Vevox. It was either general technical issues or that they had other commitments at the same time and couldn't engage. I'm not sure whether this student was mistaking Zoom for Teams or whether they were genuinely trying to access it through Zoom, which would explain why they were having problems. That was then followed up to the people who indicated they hadn't engaged with the questions, what would encourage them to attempt the questions. And I think it was the same respondent who said using the Zoom app normally. I'm not sure if they mean using Vevox normally or whether they were just confusing the technology here. That's not really clear. The question 3 was to ask whether the questions were visually engaging, and 100% of respondents said yes, they felt the questions were visually engaging. They were then asked what improvements they would recommend, and there were no suggestions here, so we can assume that everything was okay from their perspective or good from students' perspective. They were asked if questions were easy to navigate, and 100% of the people who responded said yes, the questions were easy to navigate. And again, no recommendations for improvement were provided. They were asked if they were able to easily access the in-session questions, if they were able to use the relevant app to view and attempt the questions, and 93% of people said yes, they were. Those people who responded that they weren't were given an additional question, asking them what access issues they experienced. And it seemed like it was a general technical problem, not something specific to Vevox, but something specific to that person's access to Teams generally. The next question was whether the response options were accessible. So were they clearly visible? Were they compatible with the device used? And again, 93% of people said yes. The people who said no were asked to elaborate on what issues they experienced, but there weren't any responses provided, so it's not entirely clear exactly what the issue was there. The next question then was asking whether the in-session questions helped consolidate students' understanding of the material, and 100% of students said yes, which is great. They were asked, the students who all said yes, they were asked what would have been more helpful for consolidating their understanding. There weren't any responses provided there. And then the final main question was whether they had any additional comments about their experience of engaging with Vevox during the in-session questions. Overwhelmingly, the feedback was positive from students, and this is a sample of some of the positive student feedback. There was definitely a theme of Vevox helping consolidate the learning, and a theme about it helping them to understand. Heartening to see that this comment here says that they like being able to have that clarification if they're not sure about something, because that's definitely one of the benefits of having these live quiz sessions. There was some negative feedback, not anywhere near as much as the amount of positive feedback that was received. And again, it seemed like it was more general technical issues rather than anything specific to Vevox. It seemed like they were maybe having trouble getting Microsoft Teams working, or installing an app, or finding where they should go to get Vevox within Teams. So nothing specific about Vevox, but it seems like it's more general technical issues. So some of the lessons learned. I assumed that when I had Vevox embedded within Microsoft Teams, that I, as an instructor, would be able to manage both the Teams environment and the Vevox environment from one place. But actually, as an instructor, I still had to use a separate window for to manage the Vevox questions. When recording the Teams meeting, the Vevox screen doesn't appear, and that was a big issue for students who were catching up afterwards. They couldn't actually see what the questions were. This was looked into by our cloud transformation team, who are responsible for the development of Microsoft products, and it just wasn't something that was possible. It may have changed now, but at that time it just wasn't possible for that screen to be captured in the Teams meeting recording. However, by and large, the use of Vevox during these online sessions was very warmly received by students. They don't have to log in separately, so you avoid a lot of that hassle at the start of a session where you're having to get students just helping them with the technology. That was kind of eliminated by embedding it directly within Teams, and not forcing students to have to manage two different environments. Again, cut down on some of the technical issues, and that seemed to be a bit smoother doing it through Teams. A major lesson here was about the Microsoft Forms questions, and how they weren't really fit for that purpose of having live quiz sessions. So because the Vevox questions can be controlled by the person leading the session, it allows us all to go through it at the same pace, which is how it should be for this kind of task. It also shows you the collated responses and correct answers in Vevox, which allows you to unpick any issues that students are having with their understanding of the content. And students like it, students love it. Students have consistently asked for Vevox to be rolled out more widely within different classes, different year groups. And for me, as a person, as a user of Vevox, the extensive support available is fantastic and has come in very handy. Initially, during 21-22, when I was running these sessions, this pilot study, it wasn't possible for more than one staff member to be in control of the Vevox session, so it wasn't possible for me to share it with other members of staff. So when I was leading these online sessions, some of the questions would be from my lectures, some of them from other lecturers, but only one person could control that Vevox environment, which was okay. It was just a wee bit of an annoyance. But I have since learned from one of the YouTube videos that it's now possible to share control of the Vevox session with another member of your team. So that's all I have to say about the pilot study. So there's plenty of time for questions or comments.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, very much. That's really that was really interesting. We have had quite a few questions coming in, so we'll get on to those in a second. Just before we do, I just wanted to let you guys know that the recording for this will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel as sort of quickly as possible. If you're not already, it's a great opportunity to subscribe to the YouTube channel, as you'll get instant access to all our sort of latest videos, help resources, and things like that Kellyanne's just spoken about. I think that's it. Yeah, let's have a look then at the Q&A. So I've got a question here. When you were using Vevox, did you use the sort of the Vevox present view?
Yes.
Of
yeah.
Vevox?
So when I use separate screen share, either online or on campus, yes, I use Vevox present view.
Cool.
I saw a wee question about PowerPoint as well. So I have also used the PowerPoint add-in.
Do you kind of use a mixture of both? Or?
Yeah, I do, just depending on the context. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because there was another question as well here that came in about, because you talked a lot about using polls and quizzes. Did you sort of use the Q&A at all?
No. So because there was already a chat function in Teams, we tend to just use the chat function in Teams, or if people are using Zoom and presenting there, then the chat function in Zoom. Yeah,
no, fair enough. I was just just sort of wondering when I saw that question.
The Q&A, I think, probably is more used for on-campus sessions.
Yeah, I mean, you are perfectly right. Obviously, there is that kind of chat functionality and stuff that is sort of built into Teams, in Zoom, which I think is really good for a lot of different scenarios. I think
because otherwise you end up having to monitor both the Vevox Q&A and the Teams Q&A, which is a bit much.
No, totally. And I run my own sessions through Teams, and obviously we look to use Vevox as part of that. But you are right. Sometimes there is that kind of management, of the two. I was just wondering whether, obviously, with Vevox, it's often run in that kind of anonymous way, whether sort of anonymous Q&A would be, would sort of bring a benefit. But that's cool. Okay, let's see. So there was a question here. So obviously this was a study you sort of did primarily during kind of COVID and sort of online learning. Have you got any sort of follow-up kind of plans to it, or are you kind of sort of taking the learnings from it kind of forward?
No, not immediately. So this was a university pilot. So there were lots of hoops to jump through, lots of committees to get permission from. There had to be monthly reports submitted. So the outcome of it was that the university adopted Vevox within teams across the institution.
Okay.
So in terms of that, Vevox and Teams, I don't have any follow-up, but my mind's always going about future studies about how Vevox is used generally in teaching and learning. So I'm sure it won't be the last study that I do.
No, that's cool. Because you mentioned there was a question that came in at the time, but I think you answered it, which was the question was about the kind of the functionality that you found was sort of not available to you within forms, that was kind of available within Vevox. Was there a particular was there kind of a particular poll type that was absolutely essential, to the work that you were doing, or a few of them?
I think it was really about the general functionality of forms rather than the specific question types. I mean, the pin on image is one I particularly like because I teach biological stuff. So I'd be asking them to show me certain bits of the eye or certain bits of the brain by, pointing to it in the image. But not being able to release questions one by one that are all answered at the same time, and then seeing all of the responses collated, that was a big issue in terms of the forms questions.
Yeah, cool. So there's a question here, which is a bit of a sort of technical, actual sort of setup questions. How does Teams know what Vevox questions to link to?
So when you go into the Vevox tab as an instructor, you have to log in and then you have to tell it the session ID. So you link it to a specific Vevox session. Yeah.
So that's exactly right. So you would have your Vevox session already created, within the dashboard and all of your polls, etc. in there. And then when you just add Vevox as an app to a sort of Teams session or Teams channel, and it will then bring up a sort of a separate tab. Or if you're running a sort of live meeting, you would just have Vevox up at the top, and that would just open up as a side panel down the side for people to be able to join through there. So there's a question here. So if you had one improvement, for Vevox, what would it be?
I think my one improvement would have been to allow sharing between different members of staff, and that was something that I had pinpointed in the presentation, but then had to go back and change it when I realised that was something that had already happened. What else? What did I highlight in here? It would have been nice if I could have done it all within one window.
Yep.
Within Teams and Vevox, but that's not a major deal. It's not a deal breaker.
No, so do you mean being able to kind of access, being able to sort of access your dashboard, or
yes,
create and do questions all within the kind of Teams environment? Yeah. I think that's kind of fair enough.
Because I think I had gone into it assuming that would be possible, but hey ho.
Is anything coming up to the top? I think we've answered this one, the sort of functionality. So I think there's a question here which kind of just touches upon what you were saying about that recording of the session. The Vevox, that Vevox sort of tab isn't kind of there.
So absolutely, I could have shared the screen within Teams and recorded that, but to me that kind of defeated the purpose, because having Vevox embedded in Teams, it felt to me like it should have been possible to somehow capture that. But unfortunately not. Yeah,
I mean, it's it's not. I don't think it's a sort of limitation that's just limited to Vevox. I think it's the way that
it is. It's the way Teams is set up that's the issue.
I mean, I think the only things that I would probably suggest, kind of just thinking of workarounds, that there is that one where you kind of sort of share the presentation screen, on there, potentially sort of downloading the kind of the data, or the sort of data reporting or a summary of the Q&A, making that available, somewhere, either maybe on the VLE system or alongside the recording. But I agree, it would be nice to sort of have those running kind of side by side.
That's what I've done for other sessions in Zoom with an online cohort where the recording hasn't worked. I've edited the results spreadsheet so that they can see the questions and see the answers and kind of work through them independently if they want to. So that's really great. Actually, the depth of information you can get in that data spreadsheet that's generated.
Yeah.
That's something you wouldn't get with forms either.
No, yeah, I mean, yeah, you know, you are right that the data reporting, yeah, is quite sort of in depth, yeah, on the kind of Vevox side. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay, cool. I can't see many other questions coming in, so I think we'll sort of wrap it up there if that's okay. So, thank you everyone for for joining us. I hope you found that yeah, really interesting. As I say, a great place for sort of follow-up, resources if you want to sort of technically look at how you go about, setting up Vevox within Teams. I definitely recommend going to the YouTube channel and looking at sort of help resources on there. We've also got our help site, which is help.vevox.com. Thank you very much, Kellyanne, for joining us and for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I hope everyone has a really good rest of the day. Thank you very much, guys.